In this chapter, we're going to take a look at how to create forms in our HTML documents. Up to this point, all of our chapters have been about creating code that displays our content. But forms are actually needed when we want to gather data from the users themselves. Now, I've got a simple form we can try out first. Let's use the tryout forms HTML file, and like usual, I'll just open it up in the browser first. And you can see it's very simple. In fact, it just includes a couple of places for a username and a password. So you can see that even on a login screen, we would need to actually develop a form in order to gather that information from the user. Let's go out and take a look at this in our text application as well. And as usual, we've just got the basic tags set up. I've got my heading up in here. And then we've got the two words, username and password, separated by a couple of different line breaks. Now, it is important to note that when forms go out onto the web, there's really two parts that you're seeing. The first is the HTML form that creates the entry blocks that you use to enter your data. And the second part is usually an application on the server that the data is being sent to. Now, since we don't have a server readily available to all of us, we won't be testing out the server portion of things, and we'll focus on the creation of the forms in HTML. In our document here, if we want to make this username and password login into a form, the first thing we need to add is the form tag. And I'm going to use it to enclose all of the elements of the form. I'll go right above the content, which is username here. And first we'll add the beginning of our form tag. And of course, we'll close the form tag down below all the other elements here at the bottom. Now, the form tag, in order for it to do its job, has two required attributes that we need to set up. So let's go back up to the top here. And the first attribute we need to add is an action. And of course, we set this up like every other attribute with an equal sign and some quotes. And we need to add a value to it. Now, for the action attribute, the value is where the data is going to go. Typically, we would add the URL path to some file or script on the server. And it might look something like this. We'll say it's in the scripts folder of the root. And we'll call it dataprocess.asp. Now, obviously, we're not connected to a server, and we don't have a file called dataprocess.asp. But if you're working with your host provider or the rest of your network team, and they've set up some scripts for you to use, all you need to do is put in the correct URL address to get to that script. Now, for our examples, there is one easy script that we can try. We can send all of the data directly to an email address. I'll take out this fake address that we put in here, and I'll add in mail to first. That's the same header when we want to link to an email address. And then we can just add in whatever email address you want. In your own examples, you could add your email address, and then you can test it out by sending email to yourself. Now, I said there were two required attributes, and the second one is method. We'll set it up with an equal sign and some quotes too. And with the method, what we're going to do is specify how the data is going to be sent. The method is usually determined by whoever wrote the program. So usually they'll tell you what method to use. And two very common ones are get and post. For our email example, we're going to be using the post method. And that basically just means it's going to attach our data to a URL and send it wherever we want it to go. Now, there are a few additional attributes you can use that are optional, but one very common one is to use the name attribute. And we'll see these used a lot in form elements just to make sure that you can distinguish one element from another. So I'll add a quick name attribute, and we'll set that equal to login so we can tell this form apart from any others. You can actually have many form tags on one page, and then you might need to actually distinguish one form from another. Well, now that we've added our form block, we need to add some form elements inside of it so that our user can actually enter the data. Now, the most common form element is the input tag. So I'm going to go ahead and put an input tag right after the word username here. Our input tag can be used a number of different ways. And we specify what kind of element we're going to be working with by using the type attribute. So I'll set that up next. The most common type of element we'll use is a text box. And the type for that is just simply text. And next I'll add a name attribute like we did in our form tag. In this case, I'll use uname, short for username. And what's more important when we're setting up the names for each of the individual input elements is that what we're doing here is we're actually naming the data when it gets sent out. A lot of times these names will be given to you by the programmer, and you'll need to set up the correct name in order for the data to be used properly when it's sent. But in any case, this name is what's going to identify that data as well as help you find the field inside of your layout. Our input tags are examples of what we refer to as empty tags, meaning we're not going to be enclosing any content with them. So I'll just use a self-closer at the end by using a slash here, like we did for the BR and HR tags. Now we want a second input device for the password. So let me just copy this tag that we've just made, and I'll paste it down next to the password area, and that'll create our second element. We'll change the name so that we can identify this as a different field. I'll just use PW for the name here. And I'm also going to change the type. We could use a text field here, but there just happens to be an input type specially made for use as a password field. Of course, it's called password. Now we've got two elements inside of our form. Let's see what our page looks like so far. I'll save my changes, and we'll go up and refresh the page. And there you can see our two form elements have been added in the form of text boxes. And these work just like you think they should. If I click my cursor into the field, the text box activates, and then I can type something into it. I can even use the tab key to switch down to the next box. Now let me just make up a password. As I type into this field, you'll notice that I'm not seeing the characters and I'm only seeing the dots. And that's exactly what a password field is supposed to give me. Of course, don't confuse this with any real encryption or security. It's simply hiding the characters so that someone looking over your shoulder while you're typing the password won't be able to see what you typed. Now so far our form's working okay, but you'll notice we're missing one important element, a submit button. I don't have any way to send the data in. So let's go back to our document and set that up. We create a submit button by using the same input tag with a different type. So first I'm just going to go down here below the password but still inside the form, and I'll add one more input tag. This time we'll set the type to submit. It's still an empty tag, so I'm going to put a self-closer at the end, and we can test it just like this. I'll hit save. We'll go back and refresh the page, and you can see now I have a submit query button down below the other two elements. We're seeing the standard default button get created here, but we can customize it. If I go back to my document, I can add a value attribute to my input tag. For this particular tag, the value is whatever I want the button to say. So let me type in here the word send, and I'm specifically going to use a capital S because that's the way I want my button to appear. I'll save that change, and we'll go back out to our document and refresh, and now you can see I simply have a send button down here at the bottom. Well, that's all there is to a working form. Let me go ahead and type something in the password. I'll click my send button, and what this button will do is it'll activate the action. Since our form's action attribute was set up with a mail to command, you can see that it's brought up my email client here. It's set up a mail to someone@somewhere.com, which is where I set the mail to going. And you can see that the data is included in here as well. The name property was used to identify each element of data, and it's copied all the data values that I entered in the form into the email as well. And here you can see that the password isn't really encrypted. Any security you might need will be set up with the application in the server, not necessarily with the HTML. And as you can see, using a mail to action like this allows me to fully test my form out without having to have any connection to a server or any application to run.